Beautiful where I lived. So, there's a couple of things, just talking about the love for history. Jim was mentioning the Battle of Britain. I have my ringtone is an Iron Maiden song. For when Gretchen calls, it rings this song called Aces High. And that was about the Battle of Britain. It's describing an aerial battle, and I put it that way because at the end of that battle, Churchill said, never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few. So that's how I feel about my wife. So I thought, man, this would be a great ringtone. So every time that rings, I'm like, man, I really owe that girl a lot. And then there's another thing. History is an interesting thing. One of the easiest ways, a great way to learn about history, it's really intimidating, right? History, because there's so much of it. When we're taught, we've just jumped around it's kind of, we're jumping around like evolutionists do with years. They say, between 100 and 500 million years ago. I'm like, you're giving yourself that's a pretty big window there. But there's another thing that stuck out to me when Jim was talking about the Wright brothers. And there's at the same time that Orville and Wilbur were working on their plane, the government had recognized the need for this. We need to make some advancements here. This could be a really big deal. So they had given a substantial grant to somebody else to, get this concept of airplane going, and it literally never got off the ground. But the guys who weren't dependent on government, who were funding it out of their own pocket and private investors, they flew in Kitty Hawk, and there we have it. So just a little jab at the unnecessity of government, whatever. So I want to tell you about providence in my own life. In 1984, while other people were busy making it the greatest decade of music ever, I was busy being 14 years old. That's me. I was 14 and running a race in Whistler. And it's funny, in my right hand, the baton, I was 14, this is grade 8, and the baton we had was a Labatt Blue bottle opener, which I still have. The race was sponsored by Labatt Blue, and now, could you imagine a 14-year-old running with a beer bottle opener? It would be tragic. There would be all kinds of, somebody would sue somebody. So 1984, there was a girl, looked very much like this, dressed in costume, in my makeup, who ended up in a conversation with me and my best friend. This is an aerial view of Ambleside Beach in West Vancouver, British Columbia. 1984, I'm out there. This is the first time we'd driven out the city. My parents, it's the first time they'd let me walk around the city, even though it wasn't the downtown core, it was the west around West Vancouver. And I was allowed to just walk around by myself, and they said, we'll pick you up in a few hours. So we're sitting literally on that spot right there, and this girl comes walking up to us dressed in all my makeup and everything, and she just starts talking to us about Jesus. And it was really uncomfortable. I was a Christian, my friend was not, and it was just uncomfortable because I was that kind of Christian, And it was very good though. I remember it just really impacted me, so anyway, they left. And I walked away from my friend a little later, just before we went to find my parents, and I found this group, and I told this girl, I just said, hey, thank you for talking to me. I really needed to hear that. It was good. And the only thing I remember about anything else about them was they were from Texas, okay? So an interesting thing, during that time when that girl was talking to us, the team leader one of the team leaders was walking away to go somewhere, and God spoke to her and said, go back to the beach. So she walks back to the beach and sees me and being spoken to by this girl, and God says to her, points me out and says, pray, I want you to pray for that boy because I have a special destiny for his life. So she does, she prays, and when the conversation was done, she felt a release to walk away. Jumping ahead to 1990 in September, we're sitting in the guys' dorm doing DTS intros. God had gotten a hold of my life. I was really needing the answer to the question, is God really who he says he is? And so through other events, which I won't go into, I end up in DTS. So we're doing introductions. This girl stands up. In fact, how do I make this one go? In fact, it was this girl. She stands up in the thing and says, hi, my name's Stephanie Duma. And I looked at her, I said, I know you. In 1984, you spoke to a friend of me in Vancouver, British Columbia on the beach. And she goes, I thought I recognized you, And I thought, how can I recognize this girl with all this makeup on? But I did. And she was up there doing an SST outreach with Matthew and Leanne Nokus were leading that outreach. And for the next 10 years, next 15 years of my life in YWAM, God used Matthew and Leanne. They were the primary disciplers of my life. And I thought, God, that's providence right there, that God was engineering that kind of a thing. And then one of the reasons I came here is because they had a cycling team, a ministry called Bike International. When I got here, there was no Bike International. It had been, I guess, for 2 years. God had led them to be praying that he would raise up a Canadian to come and lead that team. 2 days before I was going to go home after my SOE, I'm freaking out, going, God, what am I going to do with my life? You've ruined me, And Matthew Nokas sits down and says, hey, Ken, I want you to pray about leading this team. And ding, I knew right there, God just said, this is it. This is what I want you to do. And so I thought, from 1984, God sends these guys. How crazy. And it's great because it gives me, I regularly think about that, and it encourages me in the present. So anyway, that's it. Oh, and now what's kind of cool, so God has called me to the United States, and I married a girl, awesome woman, Gretchen, and now I have a son named, one of my sons is Josiah. He's named after Josiah Bartlett, who's the second signer of the Declaration of Independence, and his great grandfathers descended on Gretchen's side. I thought, that's just pretty cool too. So, yeah, so let's talk about, here's what I want to talk to you about. Why should we care about American history? Government in general, the founding era and specifically, and the issues of our day. Why does it matter? And I'm going to suggest here that it ought to matter to you, and you need to care about these things. And I'm going to go look at some history and show you this is why we need to believe this. First of all, God establishes the nations. He determines their appointed times in history. In Acts 17:26, it says, from one man he has made every nationality to live over the whole earth, has determined their appointed times and the boundaries where they live. He did this so that they might seek God and perhaps they might reach out and find him, though he is not far from each of us. So America, if this is true, which it is, America has a purpose for existing. There's a purpose for the existence of America. She didn't begin when we were born. We just popped in onto the timeline, okay? So God was doing something, and then here we are. He's still doing something, and he's going to do something still. So therefore, we need to avoid a myopic view of America and the issues of the day, okay? We need to let the past inform our understanding of the future. This is very important, and it's happening whether you know it or not. The past, your thoughts and beliefs and experiences are always informing your actions in the present, and will often determine what you're going to do in the future, because that's your understanding. When you get engaged in discussion and debate with people about anything, you're drawing, it's like you're here engaging people, but really you're drawing on all this stuff back here, your life experience and knowledge, and you're bringing it in. If you don't have anything to draw on, you're lots of cricket sounds, and you lose all the time. Debates, losing's for losers. You don't want to lose debates. I'm just kidding. Not everybody can be a winner. All right, let's have a quick look at government. God instituted civil government in Genesis. Therefore, it was his idea. Government is good. Government is not bad, though not all government and not all forms of government and not all who govern are good. We know that. History tells us that. Stalin, Hitler, Genghis, the whole lot of these guys, they're not all, just because somebody, I think there's a misinterpretation of the scripture that all authority is established by God. Well, there is authority and there's power. I have the power to beat up maybe 20% of you in here, and I have the authority to beat up none, and none of you, you know what I mean? There's power to do things, but you don't have the authority to do it. And right now, the government, the federal government, is doing many things they don't have the authority to do, but they certainly have the power because we gave it to them. John Locke tells us that the end of government is the good of mankind. And where did he get that idea from? Obviously, the Bible. If you don't know who John Locke is, some dry reading, but he informed much of your law is due to the thought of John Locke. He got that idea from the Bible. The Bible tells us that the government is a minister of God to us for good. Again, it's for our good. It's intended to punish those who do evil and praise those who do right. We see that in 1 Timothy. So the question is, if that's true, they're supposed to punish evil and condone what is good, what is necessary for the people in government to know, to understand? The difference between good and evil, right and wrong. Lots of people understand it, but don't care, Look at abortion right now. It's the law of the land. How many times do you hear that repeated? The courts forbid people to pray. That's just comical, really, if it weren't so stupid. I mean, no praying. You can't tell people you can do whatever. Anyway, marriage has been redefined. That's hubris right there, you guys. That's the arrogance, the sheer arrogance of somebody to say this now is what marriage is. That's like God established marriage. It's his institution, and we're just and talk about, and then to pick a rainbow for the whole thing, like when God flooded the earth. That was what a bad little symbol there. Didn't God destroy everybody? Let's make that our flag. And then homosexuality has been affirmed. Think about this, you guys. Homosexuality is being affirmed. That means it's being encouraged. You know what that means for people? It's directly stepping. It's like this. The Holy Spirit is trying to convict people and deliver them and restore them to right relationship with God. And we've done this. Right in between the Holy Spirit and that person, we're saying, no, hey, the way you feel, that's fine. That's just how you are. It's okay. It's normal. And we're condemning them. The government and supporters of this are condemning those people to a life of slavery to the sin of homosexuality. And after a generation, try undoing that. It gets a lot more difficult. The states demand now that we bake cakes for gay weddings. Birth control, it's considered a right. Somehow they found that right in the Constitution, and you have to provide it for other people out of the expense, out of your own pocket, The current administration in this country, and this will be probably my only jab at this administration, is definitely confused by right and wrong. And by the administration, I mean the whole gamut of everybody trying to run the show up there. I think... this is not my opinion, but what it is now. But Barack Obama, this current administration is the most biblically hostile. He's the most biblically hostile president, and the least qualified, and that's just a statement of fact, ever in the history of the United States. And I believe he's been elected by the least qualified electorate ever in the history of this country. Maybe ever. I haven't really looked at that, but an uninformed electorate elects anybody. I know people who said, well, I voted for Barack Obama because I wanted to be able to say I voted for the first black president. Like, what? We don't need diversity. We don't need a black guy running the show. We don't need a white guy. We don't need a Navajo Catholic priest. What we need, anybody. Think about it. We need, there's all this talk about we need diversity. Hispanic people don't need a Latino representing them. They need somebody who understands the principles that will provide for their liberty and prosperity. That's what they need. We don't, it's just stupid. And now there's Hillary's going with this. I know she's trying to play this card with the first woman president. We don't need a woman president. That might be great. I mean, if Margaret Thatcher, I could say, well, we could use Margaret Thatcher, but we don't need Hillary Clinton. We don't need Ted Cruz. We don't need anybody. We just need nobody in particular except somebody who understands the principles of government in biblical truth and loves Jesus, Okay, so we're supposed to submit to these authorities and obey these authorities so that, the Bible tells us, we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. Now, does anybody see a dilemma here? It's difficult to live at peace when the wicked rule. The Bible tells us that when the wicked rule, the righteous, the people groan. It's God's intention is not for the wicked to rule. Consider the power of government in your life. Okay, you want to live at peace here and obey the authorities. Well, the power of the government in your life, with the stroke of a pen, the government can divert. If I were the government, I could divert resources, God's resources, to man's resources, to my purposes. So you got a bunch of money, I can confiscate a large part of it and direct it elsewhere instead of you giving it to missions or wherever. The government can put you into a bureaucratic visa hell. Has anybody been in that particular purgatorial thing? It's unbelievable, The profit motive, that would fix a lot of things, but it can confiscate your inheritance or the inheritance of your children. The Bible tells us to leave an inheritance for our children. They can take it all. in some circumstances. They want to control. The government can control your child's education. Anybody here familiar with Common Core? This whole thing with Common Core. There's a little jingle that goes, or jingo, whatever, that goes with it, and that's college and career ready. It's been repeated over and over. We need to be college and career ready. Well, no, you don't. You don't need to be college ready, or if you do, well, yeah, you do. If you're going to go to college, you need to be ready, and you better have a biblical worldview and be ready for some warfare, you know. But college and career ready, it's an idol. It's saying what we need is a career. That's the highest thing in life. Well, you know what? You don't need to go to college. College can be a great servant of the call of God in your life, but make sure you know what God's saying to you first, and then go to college. And pick wisely, you know, as we're looking at that book, what is it, Godless Constitution? Unbelievable. That's just unbelievable. The government can dethrone fathers or the heads of household, and they do that. And it's being done by policies that some of them seem good at first. It discourages marriage and promotes out-of-wedlock childbirth. It can hinder your ability to travel. It can throw you in jail, and it does for obeying your conscience. And it can make missions very, very, very costly by bad policy. And unchecked, this is true, unchecked, government will consume all the other spheres. That's just what it does. If you don't think that's the case, well, I think you're wrong, man. It will. It's already doing that. There's no check on it. There's no moral stop signs in the road. It just keeps going and going and going because that's the nature of humanism. So what's the big deal about the founding era? Understanding our history helps us to understand the present, to know where we're going and why. Even if that direction is good or bad, it doesn't matter, but it informs us and gives us understanding. Thomas Jefferson said that history, by apprising citizens of the past, will enable them to judge of the future. It will avail them, I'm sorry. It will avail them. That is terrible. Okay, it will avail them of the experience of other times and nations. See that? It brings understanding of other times and other nations, things that have gone on before you. It will qualify them as judges of the actions and designs of men. It will enable them to know ambition under every disguise it may assume, and knowing it, to defeat its views. That's very cool. You can't really, anyway, I don't need to explain some of that. It's very self-explanatory, right? When God was delivering his people out of Egypt and forming them into a nation, he often commanded them to remember their history. Many times, build some rock, pick up some rocks out of the river, make a monument, because you're going to forget. Call this well such and such so that you remember. We'll calling children certain things because the Lord was great or the Lord delivered me, whatever. Deuteronomy 6 reads this, and when you eat and are satisfied, boy, this is a message to Americans, be careful not to forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. When your son asks you in the future, what is the meaning of the decrees, statutes, and ordinances which the Lord our God has commanded you, you tell him, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out with a strong hand. The Lord commanded us to follow all these statutes and to fear the Lord our God for our prosperity always and for our preservation as it is today. Righteousness will be ours if we are careful to follow every one of these commands before the Lord our God as he has commanded us. Is that not a lesson for America today? What a great scripture that is. And this helped them, understanding this, helped them focus on the present and be active in what God is doing and to look to the future. God said again in Deuteronomy, he says, I led you for 40 years in the desert and your shoes and your clothing never wore out. Isn't that amazing? That's an amazing piece of history right there. They walked around for 40 years in a desert and their clothes never wore out. Consider these words by Washington after America exited her own desert, all right? The hand of providence has been so conspicuous in all this that he must be worse than an infidel that lacks faith and more than wicked that has not gratitude enough to acknowledge his obligations. Moses exhorts the people in Exodus to remember this day when the Lord brought you out of Egypt in the place of slavery with a strong hand. And similarly, Noah Webster is considered the schoolmaster of the nation. Very cool guy, this guy. He says, every child in America should be acquainted with his own country. He should read books that furnish him with ideas that will be useful to him in life and practice. As soon as he opens his lips, he should rehearse the history of his own country. In 1821, Thomas Jefferson writes this in a personal letter. Ta-da. Hold on. I just hit up instead of down. I forgot I even put that in there. I was like, why is everybody laughing? So Thomas Jefferson writes this letter to a friend. He says, "It is the duty of every good citizen to use all the opportunities which occur to him for preserving documents relating to the history of our country." I think I do that with books. I feel this obligation for old books. I have some books, I'll never read them, but they're just on a shelf in a bookstore. I thought, man, somebody's got to have this book. It's like 1898. Somebody ought to have it, so why not me? God told Abraham, "I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing." We've heard that many times today, that God wanted to bless Abraham in order to be a blessing to others as part of his plan. So he was a blessing, and America today, absolutely today, America is a blessing. America has restrained evil around the world constantly. I grew up during the Cold War. The Soviet Union was a real threat. Communism was a real threat in our lifetime. And as a Canadian, I was under no illusions that our defense against the Soviets was not the vast Canadian tundra and the Arctic up there. It was the fact that Ronnie Reagan was in office and he'd shoot back, and that's just evil. There's a time when man will not be governed internally, he will be governed externally. God will bring external restraint. And the United States was an external restraint to the ambitions of communism. America has saved millions from the shackles of Marxist thinking. There's many ways to make a slave of somebody, and chains are the least effective. If you can enslave his mind, you've got him. America's been the greatest mission sending and supporting nation in the world. Millions have found refuge and prosperity within our borders, and starvation in many parts of the world has been denied victims because of the generosity of Americans. Americans are the most generous people on earth. And I want to say something about that. This is true of private citizens. Americans give more money than anybody else in the world. I'm not just talking quantity, but per capita. That's something that's in the nature, the character of Americans, is to give. Whenever there's, now the difference, and I'll say this about liberals and progressive liberals, or just liberals in general, liberals are generous with other people's money. They're always saying to the government, we need to do more. And when they say we need to do more, it's the government needs to be doing something. The government. And the Christian worldview is that we need to be doing something. We need to listen to God and then obey and give. And when the government starts doing everything, it starts confiscating more of what we have to give to others. And you see how that's a problem, right? Liberals are generous with other people's money, and that it's a bad thing for government. Consider this, guys. 350 of the 864 Nobel laureates as of last year were Americans, came from America. That's pretty amazing. Why is that? Ronald Reagan has some great things to say about why that is. You should just check out some Ronald Reagan on YouTube. When earthquakes and tsunamis hit around the world, who are the first people on the scene? It's the Americans, right? I remember when the tsunami hit, when Indonesia, the USS Abraham Lincoln was there on the spot. They were Johnny on the spot with the aircraft carrier, the Americans were, and they're flying, they're ready to fly into all these remote places of Indonesia, but the government part, Indonesia, they're like, whoa, we don't want American military. Anyway, they ended up being you get it. They turned the Abraham Lincoln into a hospital ship. They saved countless lives. It was amazing. What a great nation. America has been and is still a blessing. Despite what we're seeing happening, America is still a blessing to the nations. It's something to be proud of, She's not without her stains. We know that. We need to acknowledge those, but do not dwell on them. We don't dwell on the negative. God says don't dwell on the past and on the bad things that happened. Look at slavery. That was a black spot on American history. However, to their credit, I jump between these things: us, me, you, them, they, America. I am, to the credit of Americans, 600,000 of them plus died ending slavery. Their own 600,000 Americans died fighting over this issue of slavery. As Christians, so what's our role with America? Okay, our role as Christians are stewards of America. America has a purpose. God created it. He established it. Therefore, as the earth is the Lord's, so is America, right? it's been passed to us, and we'll pass it to the next generation. And here's a great way to think of our stewardship thing we have a YWAM policy when we're on outreach. Whenever you go somewhere, you leave it better than when you found it. Always looking better, right? Well, the same, it's a simple extrapolate a little, and we need to apply that to the nation. We need to leave it better than when we found it for the next generation. And that's costly, financially and time-wise. So how do we steward her? We need to fight to keep her on a right course, and you can't do that unless you know what that course is. So you need to look into history, saying, what is God doing? And we're hearing that this morning, what God's plans are for America and the world. We need to engage in the battle. There's a spiritual battle going on, but it manifests in the flesh all the time. All the time it's manifesting in the flesh. Bad ideas, good ideas, you see them around. You can't see ideas in people's heads, but you see the consequences, right? And we're seeing that all the time. So here's some helpful things. Be familiar with current events, but don't dive into current events because you'll drown. They're depressing, and be careful where you get it, you know. Don't just look for useless information, you know. That's what I do. And eventually you find some nuggets in there. Take informed positions. That means you take a position on something. Don't just go, whatever, I don't really care. You need to have a stance on something, you know, offend somebody once in a while, and it means you've got a position on something. You don't try to defend, you know what I'm saying? You don't have to be an offensive person, but if you're not offending anybody, what are you doing, you know? You're too quiet. Be knowledgeable enough about the issues and things to inspire others and to multiply yourself. Know what makes a political candidate a good one. When somebody says we're going to fundamentally change the United States of America, do you laud them or do you lunge at the TV? I lunge at the TV, you know, because immediately my worldview jumps up and my understanding of history goes, wait a minute. Sadly, I'll bet how many people could define fundamental? You know, those are fundamental. They're like, yeah, we need to fundamentally change. That's a bad idea. Never surrender. Okay, this is the stewarding America. Never surrender. It's a very good little cartoon there. That was a very well laid out rational point. But I'll still hold to my emotional opinion based on no facts or evidence. I run into this a lot, you guys. A lot. You know what that's saying? It's like, I got nothing. You know, or the saying, we'll just have to agree to disagree. That's saying, you win, I've got nothing. You know, often it is. There are times when we can agree to disagree. That really is. But a lot of the times it's not. And I've been in discussion with friends, former YWAMers, laying out a very reasonable and biblically based position. And they realize that, yeah, you're right. Well, we'll just have to agree to disagree. And I'm not even exaggerating. It's just like that, you know. And anyway, these other sayings here, God is still on the throne. Everything happens for a reason. We just need more of Jesus. Don't let these statements be your verbal signature of surrender. God is still on the throne. That's a statement of truth. Don't let it be you're resigning. You know, you can say that in resignation. Well, God's still on the throne, you know, what can we do? At least God's still on the throne and everything happens for a reason. You know what? Everything does happen for a reason. And sometimes it's because people don't do anything. Or we don't study something, or we just don't vote, you know, and how did everything happens for a reason? Well, you know how Barack Obama got elected? Well, there's a reason for that. And I don't think it was God, you know, there's some theology there that can be a little bad. Here's what we need. We need, another of the statements here, we just need more of Jesus. That's not an answer. That's a great statement, but how much more of Jesus? You know, do we need, how much? And for how long? And then what should we expect? Do we need, what should we do when more of Jesus comes? You know, we don't need more of Jesus in this sense. We need teachers, businessmen, firebrand patriots, and orators who love Jesus and who are filled by the Holy Spirit, with the Holy Spirit, and led by Him to do what's on the heart of the Lord. You know, so we just need more of Jesus. It can be a cop out of the thing. You know, I don't know what else to do. Well, man, we just need more of Jesus. He's here. All of Him is here with us already. The other thing we can do is teach. If you have children, teach them. If you don't, teach other people around you. There's always opportunity to do it, and you can do it very tactfully and in a very unoffensive way. I know because I've talked to some extraordinary liberal people and nobody got angry. one time they were smoking pot, so maybe that's why they didn't get angry at me. They really were, actually. Here's the other thing, and this is one of the key things. It's vote. You can't say this enough to the church in America. Vote. Consider this. Some stuff from David Barton. 5 Senate races in the 2002 election. There are 5 candidates who are all for returning godly values to the public arena. They're very outspoken about it. They lost, 5 Senate candidates, by a collective vote of only 57,000. 57,000 votes. That's less than 12,000 votes per state, and yet in those states, there were over 5 million Christians who never voted at all. Just 5 million. And so when you say, there's that scene in Lord of the Rings where the king of Rohan is putting on all his armor, getting ready to go out, and he's reflecting, and he says, where's the horn that blew? Where are the rider and the horse and all this stuff? And he's realizing we have to go and fight now. And then he says, how did it come to this? Well, it came to this because 5 million Christians never voted. That could be one reason, We have to get out there and vote. Daniel Webster, he said, the exercise of the elective franchise is a social duty of as solemn a nature that as man can be called to perform, that a man may not innocently trifle with his vote, that every free elector is a trustee as well for others as himself. We have an obligation to others in this, you guys. Another Lord of the Rings thing here. When Elrond, Mr. Smith, Matrix guy, it was hard shaking him on that character, but he's talking to Galadriel through their little talking stones. I have to move. There's a car window. I'm getting the light. And he says, he's looking at what's happening. He says, do we leave Middle Earth to its fate? Do we just leave them to a fate? Well, that's what we're doing when we don't vote. We're just leaving everybody else to their fate. And it doesn't have to be that way. Even those who don't believe in Christ don't have to suffer. They don't need to suffer under bad government. We can still, they can still have good rulers, even though they don't know how to elect them. So anyway, that was Daniel Webster. John Jay says, providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers. It's the duty as well as the privilege and interests of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers. Clearly a violation of the separation of church and state here by the original Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. But what does he know? Noah Webster said this, let it be impressed on your mind that God commands you to choose for rulers, just men who will rule in the fear of God. That's right out of Exodus 18. If the citizens neglect their duty and place unprincipled men in office, the government will soon be corrupted. If government fails to secure public prosperity and happiness, it must be because the citizens, we, neglect the divine commandments and elect bad men to make and administer the laws. We shouldn't expect good things from bad people. Charles Finney even said this. I'll just read the end part of this. He said, God will bless or curse this nation according to the course Christians take in politics. Some of us are called to run for public office. Some Christians are. But our responsibility, all of us, is in electing these people. It's like encouraging people to be a teacher or a businessman. We need to encourage people to be a politician. God will call people into this arena. Louis Gohmert. Can you believe that we got a guy like Louis Gohmert representing our district here, the 1st District of Texas? What an incredible man of God this guy is, And he's the real deal, Listen to this, again on voting. David Barton was saying in the 2012 election, this is the last one that gave us our happy situation now, the National Evangelical Association asked their members how many of their pastors were endorsing candidates in that election. This was the election between 2 clear choices. A man with a Judeo-Christian background, a worldview, who's Mitt Romney. The Mormon thing is up for discussion. And then Barack Obama, who is very secular in his view. There's no question about this. He had a secular worldview. 94% of pastors in the Evangelical Association didn't endorse any candidate or disciple their people in voting in the churches. 94%. Only 6% got involved in whatever way. Then 25 million Christians went out and voted for a secular government and an expansion of the entitlement state. 25 million Christians. We can have some disagreements on who we're gonna vote for at times, but it can't be this big of a discrepancy. There's just no way when you say, well, okay, there can't be this much, guys, there has to be some agreement, some unity in the body of Christ as to which candidates to vote for. And it's getting easier and easier. This is not like, if the word duh means anything to you, this is one of those times. Look at when we were in Charlotte, North Carolina, doing an outreach there, and they had the Democratic National Convention. One of the votes they had on the floor was whether or not they had removed any reference to God from the party platform. Well, they had a floor vote to reinstate that into the party statement of their platform, and the vote was no. But knowing that this would be the death knell for their party, the guy, whoever was running the show at the time, said, well, the yeas have it, and we'll reinstitute that language. So, I mean, if this is what they're talking about, that's not where you want to hang your hat these days, So, wrapping up here with some wisdom for today's issues from the past, okay? There's much to be found there's much that the founders have to say about this. You can pick your morally distasteful project, politician, or project, and consider the words of Jefferson here. He says, to compel a man to subsidize with his taxes the propagation of ideas which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. Wow, the liberals in this country love to quote Thomas Jefferson. Well, here's a great one. Just quote that. Jefferson's got some great things. Jefferson would be rolling over in his grave, right now. Hillary Clinton recently said this: I don't believe you change hearts. I believe you change laws. You change allocation of resources. You change the way systems operate. There is a little context to this, but that's what she said. Well, in contrast, James Madison would say this: au contraire, Hillary, we have staked the whole future of American civilization, not upon the power of government. Far from it, we've staked the future of our political institutions upon the capacity of mankind for self-government, upon the capacity of each and all of us to govern ourselves, to control ourselves, to sustain ourselves according to the 10 Commandments of God. Well, how about tax law? James Madison says it'll be of little avail. That's not a joke either. This is the tax law, you guys. Talk about pillaging the environment. You know how many trees they had to chop down for that? Madison says, it will be of little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice, if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood. It's true. Who can understand the stuff? We're Don Robinson. You have to go. Don't you guys have to go regularly to tax seminars to find out what the new law of the day is? Yeah. Well, Don was doing, we were doing something with taxes one time, and Don made 2 or 3 phone calls to the IRS, and he said, well, you always call the third time, right? To make sure that you got the same information from at least 2 people before you went with that. Like, oh my goodness, it's unbelievable. So I'm going to end with a word from Adams in Washington. James Madison, or John Adams. What an amazing man and what an amazing woman his wife was. Some great history with this man. What a woman his wife was. Anyway, John Adams said this: posterity, you'll never know, that's us, the future generations, you'll never know how much it cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you'll make good use of it. How powerful is that, eh? George Washington said, no country upon earth has had it more in its power to attain these blessings than United America. Wondrously strange then, and much to be regretted indeed would it be, were we to neglect the means and to depart from the road which Providence has pointed us to so plainly. I cannot believe it will ever come to pass. Should be glad he's dead, man. We could sure use him right now, but how great, what incredible things. So let's look at we're done. We need to arm ourselves. I said at the beginning, history can be super overwhelming. There's just so much of it. One of the things I really enjoy and I find useful is bits and pieces of information from here and there. And God's good in eventually bringing things to form coherent pictures, and understanding on issues. One of the things I'm always amazed about when I'm listening to Jim speak is he can take everything's so coherent, he can take all these principles and just explain it to you, and I find that tough to do. So I just put up some websites for you guys. Wallbuilders.com, you could spend the rest of your life in there. Don't. Find something you're interested in and click on that article and read it. You know, when you're reading the Bible, you start following links. Ooh, that's good, and you go all over the place. Well, that's what happens in places like Wall Builders. Don't just try to grab stuff and learn it all. Find something that tickles your fancy, you know. Hillsdale.edu, priceless, you guys. If you have not checked out Hillsdale, go to Hillsdale. Get Imprimis. It's a free subscription. They have courses on there online. I've gone through courses on the Federalist Papers that were amazing. They're taught by college professors. Economics, we used their online home economics course for homeschool with our kids. It was amazing. Just Hillsdale's incredible. Prayer University. Man, Jackson just turned me on to this a little while ago, and it's amazing. There's so much stuff on there. 5-minute videos that you can watch that are interesting, that are so informative. It's really easy. Yeah, that's great stuff. Prayer University. ThePatriotPost.us. This is a little more political and it'll fire you up, but great constitutional basis for everything. And biblically, their worldview is very biblical. Barna.org. If you want to understand the times, the culture, a generation, Barna.org is the place to go. They've got so much research and study on what's going on. So anyway, if you write down some of those, if you didn't get them all, send me an email and I'll send you a whole bunch of stuff to get you going. So thank you very much for your time.